Many years ago, in the land of Canaan, there lived a young man named Joseph, the son of Jacob. Joseph was the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons, and he was deeply loved by his father, who favored him above all his brothers. As a token of his affection, Jacob made Joseph a richly ornamented robe, a symbol of his favoritism, which only deepened the envy of Joseph's brothers. One night, Joseph had a dream. In his dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright, while the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to his sheaf. Joseph shared this dream with his brothers, but instead of inspiring unity, it only fueled their jealousy.
Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?
They scoffed, their hearts hardened with resentment. But Joseph had another dream. This time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. When he told this dream to his father and brothers, even Jacob rebuked him.
Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?
Yet Jacob kept the matter in mind, pondering its significance. One day, while Joseph's brothers were tending their father's flocks near Shechem, Jacob sent Joseph to check on them. As he approached, his brothers saw him from a distance, and the sight of the ornate robe stirred up their anger.
Here comes that dreamer,
they whispered among themselves.
Come now. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams.
But Reuben, the eldest brother, sought to save Joseph.
Let's not take his life,
he said.
Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him.
Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers stripped him of his robe, the beautiful robe he was wearing, and they threw him into an empty cistern. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers,
What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.
His brothers agreed, so they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. But Joseph's fortunes took a sudden turn when Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's handsome appearance, tried to seduce him. Day after day, she spoke to him, but Joseph refused.
"How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?"
he protested. One day, when none of the household servants were inside, she caught him by his cloak and said,
"Come to bed with me.
No.
Come to bed
No.
with me."
No.
Ugh.
but he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When Potiphar's wife saw that she had Joseph's cloak in her hand, she called her household servants and accused Joseph of trying to violate her. When Potiphar returned home, she told him the same story.
The Hebrew servant, whom you have brought among us, came in to mock me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled.
Enraged, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. But even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, who put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Sometime later, the Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials and put them in the same prison where Joseph was confined. One night, both the cupbearer and the baker had dreams, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they were dejected.
"Why do you look so sad today?"
He asked.
"We both had dreams,
They answered.
but there is no one to interpret them."
"Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams."
Said Joseph. The cupbearer told Joseph his dream first.
In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand.
Joseph said to him,
"This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison."
When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph,
I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head.
Joseph replied,
"This is what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh."
3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. However, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.